Hand cannons have always been at the core foundation of Destiny PvP pretty much since the beginning of the game. A large majority of the player base favors these weapons and favors metas when they are on top. That is likely because of the relatively unique design and playstyle they have when compared to other shooters. Hand cannons are fun, they feel rewarding to use people like that. So today I'm going to give all my hand cannon tips and tricks. Some might be more generic while some might be pretty unique, but I will cover everything that I can think of when it comes to hand cannons. So let's hop into the video. Alright, first I'm going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of hand cannons. I'm going to mostly use 140 RPM hand cannons for reference throughout the video, but most of this can be applied to other archetypes as well. So what are the strengths of these weapons? Well, the first one is the ability to peek shot. Peek shotting is basically going in and out of cover repeatedly only when you are shooting. So you will be behind cover, you will peek, shoot, and then go back behind cover like in between your shots. This gives you several advantages. 1, you cannot take damage behind cover, obviously. 2, you will get the benefit of peeker's advantage. And 3, it gives you an escape. You can easily get away if you're losing the fight. Now, notice I did not say TTK. Yes, hand cannons do have a decent TTK, but I would not put that in the strengths category because there are tons of other weapons with better TTKs. Okay, next strength is mobility. Hand cannons allow you to be very mobile and reward good movement, thus raising the skill ceiling greatly. Now, this aspect of hand cannons has been greatly nerfed with in-air effectiveness, which I personally think was a pretty bad change, but however, it is still a strength with hand cannons as you can still be more mobile than most of the other primaries. It's just not as strong as it once was. Okay, so the most basic strengths are ability to peek shot and to be mobile. Let's talk about some weaknesses. The first being ease of use. Now, I'm not saying they are hard to use. I have to clarify that because there's a weird anti-hand cannon cult following in this game, but they are definitely the hardest primaries to use in the game, in my opinion. If you disagree, that's cool, but I will say if you give a new player a hand cannon, like, they're not going to be able to do anything with it. So yeah, the downside is definitely ease of use when compared to most other primaries. They're much harder to get value out of and hit your TTK than other guns. Also, they are pretty punishing as well. If you miss or land a body shot, your TTK will skyrocket due to the nature of the weapon. So with that little overview out of the way, let's talk about some tips and tricks. So first up, I have a super quick, like pretty niche tip that I've never really seen anyone mention before, but one thing I always do with my hand cannon, since I'm a sniper player, when I'm in close range, I always fire my hand cannon before I melee. So if I'm gonna melee someone, I'll hip fire my hand cannon first. It basically just adds some extra damage to your melee, and it doesn't really add any time. Like, it's instant, so you just shoot in melee and it just adds some more chunk, like another chunk of damage to your melee. So I can't tell you how many times this has saved me. It's super obvious tip, but I haven't really seen it mentioned before. And I really can't say anyone has done it to me too often either. Like, I don't really notice people doing this. So if you haven't really thought of doing that, then there you go. Next, I have a tip to help with aim, but it might be kind of hard for me to explain, but I'll do my best. Basically, there are sort of 2 ways to go about aiming your hand cannon. The first being trying to track your target. So to do this, you would place your reticle on your target's head and try to keep it there as long as possible while shooting so that you will sort of follow your target, keeping it on your target as long as possible. This is fine. Most controllers will kind of have to do this. Most of you do this already, but the other method of aiming your hand cannon will be more of a flicking style. So instead of tracking and holding your aim on your opponent, you will just flick to their head when you are going to pull the trigger. Each time you'll just repeatedly flick. This is probably the better way to do it. When I play M&K, I do this. I do it on controller too, but honestly, it's very hard to do on controller. You need a high sensitivity for one. Also, the aim assist actually kind of works against you a lot of times when you do this, oddly enough. You probably won't really see people doing this on controller outside of like a tournament or a scrim or something, but I will say that I have noticed the best controller players do aim this way, so definitely give it a try if you're able to. It is hard to do. This is like a very high-end type of like tip on controller, at least on PC. It's much easier to do this on a mouse and keyboard. A lot of you probably do this already, but it is possible on controller as well, so something I wanted to bring up. The next tip I have has to do with recoil. So some hand cannons have some gnarly recoil while others are more stable. I'm not a big like numbers guy when it comes to like gaming in general, so I'm not going to go into like stats and the perfect recoil direction or stability stat or anything like that. That's not really my thing, but I will say that in general, if you are struggling with the recoil, which is something newer players have a hard time adjusting to, especially with hand cannons, I would recommend you slow down your shots as needed in order to make sure you get to the point where you are hitting all 3 headshots. I would say it's more important to hit all 3 headshots than to just be firing at your max RPM. I would say at first slow down and make sure you hit 3 shots. You might lose some fights. I mean, it's just how it's going to be at first, but eventually work your way up to where you'll be shooting at max RPM and hitting all 3. There's nothing wrong with pacing your shots a bit in order to make sure they land. So if recoil is an issue for you, slow down a bit and practice ensuring that you can land your shots. Next up, I want to talk about hand cannons synergy with special weapons. So hand cannons are relatively unique in the fact that they deal an instant burst of damage, meaning that the instant you pull the trigger, you are putting out about 70 damage, right? Versus an SMG, for example, where you have to hold the trigger down and keep it on target for a bit. It's not that instant burst. This allows hand cannons to have extremely good synergy with shotguns in particular, but also snipers. If you watch the best players, they will be fluidly swapping between their hand cannon and their shotguns. If you watch any of my gameplay, I do this with my sniper pretty often as well. The instant damage output from hand cannons allows you to sort of chip away at your enemy's health bar by swapping between your 2 weapons. It basically allows you to get away with hitting a sniper body shot or lets you extend your shotgun range by weakening your target first. I'm not the greatest shotgun player, like I can hang in tourneys with a shotty, but if you watch some of the like shotgun demons out there, they will flawlessly swap between their 2 weapons. Honestly, it's super clean. It looks really nice. You can tell like that it took a lot of practice. It is hard to do, but if you watch some of the top players, you can definitely see the synergy between the hand cannon and their shotgun. Alright, so my next tip is more niche and has to do with a hand cannon duel against another hand cannon user. So I guess this isn't a tip, I should say, but it's more of a like observation or I guess information for you guys. I don't know. But when you are against another hand cannon user, it is important to understand that the 3rd shot is the hardest to land. A lot of times when I'm doing 1v1s with someone, the person I'm playing will say, oh man, I just can't hit you on that 3rd shot. And that's super common because the 3rd shot is the hardest to land. And that's because as the fight goes on, you start to flinch, right? Your screen starts to get sort of like blurred or whatever, all the effects, you know, from taking damage. People are strafing. Just the longer the fight goes on, the harder it'll be to land your bullets. Now, I just wanted to point that out, and just in case that's something you're struggling with, it's completely normal, so don't feel bad. It just takes repetition to learn how to deal with flinch, especially as the fight goes on. So yeah, the 3rd shot is the hardest to land, so just something to keep in mind. Alright, I'm going to wrap this up with my final tip, which has to do with range. Yes, if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I hate how range works in this game, specifically with primaries. So when you're using a hand cannon, you really need to make sure you play in your effective range, depending on what the other team is using especially. So for example, if someone gets too close to you with an SMG or a sidearm, you are automatically dead. It doesn't matter. There is straight up nothing you can do in a primary 1v1 sense. Same thing with a pulse rifle. If they're too far away, you will lose no matter what because how range works. You need to understand your best engagement distance and always be paying attention to what primaries the other team is using so that you can stay in your range. Now, obviously if someone gets close to you with an SMG or something, you can fight back, but not with your hand cannon. If someone gets close to you, like you need to use your grenade or your melee or a rift or your class ability, you have to use abilities or a special weapon. You cannot try to 1v1 people outside of your range with your primary if they are in their primary range. So just keep that in mind. You will just sort of have to learn your range. Like, I could give you the exact numbers of hand cannons, but honestly that doesn't really help you visualize the range. Like if I tell you like 15 meters, like, well, oh okay, like I'll just, yeah. So just you're gonna have to learn like visually, and you can also do it by like live, like in the moment. If you notice, oh, that had some range fall off, it did less than that, then you're probably outside your range. So if you're trying to take that fight, like you can take fights, but you kind of rely on them missing. Like if you're shooting at someone too far away and they have a pulse, you just have to hope they miss. So that's not a fight that I would normally take, but you can also, I just want to point out, you can also tell in game, like in the moment, if somebody's out of your range. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so that's going to do it for my hand cannon mastery guide, or whatever I end up calling this. Depending on how well this does, I would like to make one for each weapon type. Obviously, I'll have to start with the ones that I am more familiar with, so next up would probably be a sniper or a shotgun guide, just because that's what I typically use, and I feel like I could give the most information on those. But anyway, let me know if this was helpful or not. If something's it's sometimes hard to make useful guides when the game has been out for so long, but hopefully at least one thing was new or a good reminder. So let me know, leave a like or comment, it helps me out. But as always, I am awake, and I'll see you next time.